I never thought my life would unravel like this. If you had told me months ago that everything I built would collapse in one night, I would have laughed. But looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming. Maybe the warning signs were there all along, waiting for me to acknowledge them. My parents weren't overly affectionate. Love in our house was measured, earned, and always accompanied by expectations. But they taught me two things: loyalty and perseverance. Those values shaped me. From a young age, I understood that success wasn't handed out, it was fought for. I spent years grinding, sacrificing social events, sleep, and relationships to get ahead. Growing up in a modest Sydney suburb, I didn't have connections or privilege. I had to work for everything. By the time I turned 29, my relentless drive had landed me a coveted role at one of the city's top private banks. Relationships, though, had always been an afterthought. Late nights at the office, endless networking, and the constant pressure to succeed left no time for romance. And honestly, I was fine with that. That all changed when I met Madeline. It was at a bank gala, one of those high-end networking events meant to impress clients. I wasn't looking for anything, but there she was, vibrant, outgoing, and effortlessly charming. The kind of woman who could command a room without trying. She was nothing like me. Free-spirited, unpredictable, and completely at ease in the spotlight. I hesitated at first. I wasn't used to people like her. But Madeline had a way of making you feel like you belonged, like you were the most interesting person in the world. And before I knew it, I was falling for her. Things escalated quickly. Soon, we were talking about marriage. Her conservative parents were skeptical at first, but my stable career eventually won them over. Moving in together was a big step, one that cemented our future. I threw myself into planning the wedding, convinced it would be the start of something perfect. But the illusion of perfection is dangerous. As the wedding day drew closer, I started noticing things. Madeline's interactions with my groomsmen, especially Ryan, seemed too familiar, too comfortable. I brushed off my unease, telling myself trust was the foundation of any strong relationship. After all, Ryan had been my best friend since university, charismatic, well-liked, the guy everyone wanted around. He'd always had my back. Why would I doubt him now? Jason, another groomsman, was a newer friend. Loud, impulsive, always up for a wild time. He was fun but reckless, the kind of guy who attracted trouble. Still, I never imagined he'd be involved in what was coming. The bachelor party was wild, a trip to the Gold Coast packed with horse races, the casino, and poolside relaxation. Ryan and Jason left early, claiming work commitments, but not before leaving chaos in their wake. Hotel security found a bag of pills in our suite, resulting in an eviction. With nowhere else to go, we spent the night at the airport, waiting for a flight back to Sydney. Back home, my groomsmen weren't ready to call it a night. "Come on, Ethan, it's still your weekend," they urged. "Let's hit Lucas's place." I was exhausted but didn't want to kill the mood. Madeline was out with her friends, so I tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. She had moved in with me 2 months earlier after her lease ended. Her Catholic parents weren't thrilled, but they tolerated it because of my career. At Lucas's place, my friends crashed almost immediately. I found a guest room, hoping for sleep, but just as I started drifting off, my phone buzzed. A text from my downstairs neighbor. "Get some rest, idiot. Some of us have work tomorrow." I frowned, thinking it was a mistake, but another message followed. "Exactly. Just take her off and go to bed or shut her up. You must be really good to respond while your fiancé is moaning so loud." My stomach twisted. He thought he was texting someone else. Someone in my apartment. What's going on? I texted back, my hands suddenly cold. Then it hit me, I had a way to find out. The penthouse I had bought came with remote access to the previous owner's security system. I rarely used it, but I had never bothered disabling it either. I opened the app. The living room was trashed, empty bottles, glasses, and a familiar bag of pills on the coffee table. My pulse pounded as I switched to the bedroom feed. And there they were. Madeline, Ryan, Jason, in my bed. Ryan's voice was unmistakable. "I missed you," he murmured. And then Madeline, with no hesitation, responded, "I missed you too, Ryan." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My fiancé in bed with my best man. And Jason. The same men who had been celebrating with me just hours ago. But it wasn't just the betrayal. It was what they were saying. They were talking about me, mocking me. And then Madeline dropped the final bombshell. "I'm not going to bother with birth control. Ethan wants kids right away, so we'll just play Russian roulette and see what happens." A wave of nausea hit me. I turned off the feed, my hands shaking. but I let the recording continue. I needed evidence. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. Lucas and Brandon were still passed out. I forced myself to stand, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and absently flipped through an old newspaper on the counter. A headline caught my eye, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. I glanced at the newspaper again. Police issue warning about booze-fueled attacks. The article detailed recent assaults, drunken men following women home and attacking them. A terrible crime, but in that moment, it gave me an idea. An idea that could turn this entire situation in my favor. Before I could think it through, my phone buzzed again. Another message from my downstairs neighbor. I filed a noise complaint. The cops are on their way with tools drawn. Hope George is okay. Praying for both of you. My pulse spiked. This was getting out of control. I bolted back to the bedroom and dialed the police. New South Wales Police, how can I help? A calm female voice answered. I think my fiancée is being attacked. I blurted, forcing panic into my voice. Sir, please stay calm. Can you provide details? She asked, unfazed. How can I be calm? I snapped. I'm not home, but my neighbor reported loud noises. He called the cops. Please, send someone now. She pressed for specifics. I feigned confusion, claiming I had no idea what was happening, just that Madeline might be in danger. After a brief pause, she transferred me to a detective. Detective Sergeant Mitchell, Sex Crimes Unit. How can I help? A steady male voice came through. I'm terrified for my fiancée, I stammered. Please, send officers now. We have a unit nearby, but we need to verify something, he said. Are you serious? I shouted. She could be in danger. We're getting married soon, and if anything happens to her, I'll sue you and the department for negligence. That did the trick. He assured me they were sending officers immediately. I hung up and exhaled sharply. My hands were shaking. 20 minutes later, another message from my neighbor appeared. Sorry, mate. Thought it was you. The cops are here. Tools out. Hope George is okay. I muttered under my breath. Oh crap. They actually bought it. A nervous curiosity pulled me back to the security feed. I logged into the system and switched to the bedroom camera. My stomach dropped. Ryan and Jason were there, tying Madeline's wrists and ankles to the bed with my work ties. She wasn't resisting, but something about her posture seemed off. Was this all part of a game, or had things taken a darker turn? I switched to the living room feed, scanning for anything that might escalate police action. Then suddenly Madeline screamed. Loud. Panicked. I flinched as the apartment door creaked open on the screen. 2 officers entered cautiously, weapons drawn, signaling to each other. Moments later, 4 more followed. They moved with sharp, precise coordination. I flicked back to the bedroom feed. Armed police. Get on the floor, now. 1 officer barked. Ryan and Jason froze. Jason, predictably, tried to resist. A swift kick to the stomach sent him crashing down. Ryan stayed still, wide-eyed, until an officer grabbed him by the hair and yanked him to the ground. The scene was surreal. Ryan and Jason, stark naked, restrained. Madeline, equally undressed, still bound to the bed. An officer quickly covered her with a blanket, untying her carefully before leading the men away. What the hell is going on? Ryan shouted. This is the last woman you'll see for a while, an officer growled. Jason, ever the idiot, muttered it wasn't coercion and was rewarded with a baton to the ribs. Help us out, and this could go easier for you, another officer warned, but both men remained silent. Take them to the van. 1 call each, the lead officer ordered. A female officer sat beside Madeline, now wrapped in a blanket. You're safe now. We'll call your fiancé, he'll meet you at the hospital. Hospital? Madeline croaked. Just a precaution. Do you want us to call your mother? The hospital has a team for sexual assault victims. Madeline's expression shifted. Her lips parted slightly as if debating what to say. Coercion. She mumbled, voice distant. You're safe now, the officer reassured her. Paramedics are on their way. I sat motionless, watching, waiting. What would she do? Stick to her story? Or play the victim? I switched to the interrogation room feed. Ryan and Jason sat in their underwear, stone-faced. A plainclothes officer sat across from them. We found a stash of pills in your apartment, he said. These could be classified as illicit substances. You're over the personal use limit. That's a minimum of 3 years, plus sexual assault charges. Ryan's jaw tightened. We're saying it wasn't coercion. Jason leaned forward. We're invoking our right to remain silent and requesting an attorney. Help us, and it'll go easier for you. The officer tried. Silence. The officer sighed. All right, we'll do it your way. Take them to the van. One call each. As the officers led them away, the female officer returned to Madeline. My phone rang. I forced urgency into my voice as I answered. Hello. This is Sergeant Mitchell. I immediately bombarded him with questions. What happened? Is Madeline okay? Where is she? Calm down, Mr. Caldwell, Mitchell said. She's safe. We're taking her to the hospital for a precautionary exam. Is she hurt? I asked, voice shaking. Physically, she appears fine. Just standard procedure. Meet us at St. Vincent's in 10 minutes. Call me when you arrive. Before I could ask more, the line went dead. I took a shaky breath and called a cab. My mind was racing. This was unfolding better than I expected, but the biggest question remained. Who would the police believe? Madeline? Or Ryan and Jason? I had to stay sharp. Play my part perfectly. At the hospital, a constable led me into a private waiting room where Sergeant Mitchell was on a call. He hung up as soon as I entered. Mr. Caldwell, he greeted, extending a firm handshake. I met his gaze, my voice tight with anxiety. Where's my fiancée? She's with the doctors. You'll see her soon, Mitchell replied, motioning for me to sit. But first, I need to ask you a few questions. I nodded, steadying myself. Tonight, armed officers entered your apartment. Mitchell continued, his expression unreadable. They detained 2 men who had tied your fiancée to the bed and were engaged in sexual activity. I swallowed hard, letting my expression shift from concern to barely contained fury. What happens now? I asked, my voice breaking at just the right moment. Because I already knew. This wasn't over yet. I sat frozen for a moment, absorbing what I'd just heard. They're being interrogated now, Mitchell explained, his voice steady. I barely let him finish before cutting in. What about Madeline? She's receiving medical care. They're conducting exams, but I need to ask you more questions before you can see her, he said. I exhaled sharply, frustration creeping into my voice. Do we have to do this now? Yes, Mitchell replied firmly. Madeline's well-being is our priority. I ran a hand through my hair, forcing a weary sigh. I just want to see her. You will, he assured me. But first, I need to clarify some details. Mitchell leaned forward, rubbing a hand over his thinning hair. Where were you tonight? I feigned confusion. Why does that matter? Because if you had been home, Madeline wouldn't be in this situation, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. I hesitated for just the right amount of time before answering. I was at a friend's house for my bachelor party. We got back late from Brisbane, and one of my friends wanted to keep the party going. Where was this? Renwick, eastern suburbs. When did your neighbor contact you about the noise? I pulled out my phone. I'll check. Around 11:45 p.m. Mitchell nodded, then pulled out his own phone, showing me photos. Do you recognize these men? I leaned in, acting uncertain. Is this normal? Just a hunch, he said. They don't fit the usual profile. They look like office workers. I furrowed my brows as I took a closer look. Then I let my face shift into surprise. What's this? Why are you showing me pictures of Ryan and Jason? I asked, making sure my voice carried just the right amount of disbelief. Who are they? Mitchell asked, studying my reaction. I swallowed. Ryan's my best man. Jason's a groomsman, a friend. What's going on? Mitchell didn't hesitate. These 2 were found in your apartment. Undressed. I stiffened. Why weren't they at the bachelor party? They left early. Said they had work, Mitchell replied. I sank into a chair, letting my shoulders slump in an exaggerated show of defeat. Before Mitchell could say more, a voice cut in behind me. Mick, can I have a word? A female officer stood in the doorway. Mr. Caldwell, can you step outside for a moment? She asked, her voice polite but firm. I nodded, making sure to leave my phone on the chair. Before stepping out, I quickly set it to record. The officers spoke quietly in the hallway for a few minutes before leaving together. I returned to my seat, picked up my phone, and pressed play. The female officer spoke first. We've finished the checks. I wrote a statement for Madeline, but she hasn't signed it yet. Mitchell exhaled. Do you think it's legitimate? There was a pause. I'm not sure, the female officer admitted. She definitely had sex, but consent doesn't seem to be the issue. Her story feels rehearsed, like a last fling before the wedding. Mitchell made a sound of agreement. The men don't seem like a typical threat. But we've got enough pills to hold them overnight, she added. Mitchell was silent for a moment. Then, Lowering his voice, he asked, "What about the fiancé?" "I can't say for sure," the officer admitted. "But he's playing the shocked victim a little too well." Mitchell sighed. "What should we do?" "We need to talk to Madeline about the penalties for perjury before she signs anything," she suggested. "How tough should we be? Scare her a little? She might be guilty, or just nervous, but we'll get something useful out of her." "All right," Mitchell decided. "Let's go talk to her." I ended the recording and sat still for a moment, my mind racing. Madeline hadn't signed the statement yet. That meant she was hesitating, which meant she was thinking, which meant I had time. My watch blinked, reminding me it was time to act. I scrolled through my contacts and made a call. The voice on the other end answered after 2 rings. "Nathan Holloway?" Nate ran the most notorious gossip column in the city, CBD Confidential. The kind of column that people claimed they didn't read, even though everyone did. I had met him at a fundraiser a while back, and we had hit it off instantly. "Hey, Nate, it's Ethan." "Ethan? What's going on at this hour?" "It's a long story," I replied. "Just wanted to check if your column's ready for tomorrow." "Almost. Slow news day. Got something for me?" I leaned forward. "Depends. You sure you want it? Might be too late if you don't jump on it now." Nate was silent for a moment. Then, I could practically hear the hunger in his voice. "How about 2 corporate guys getting caught with pills and sexual assault charges?" That got his attention. "That's gold. Can you name names? You sure you want that heat? You might get sued." Nate scoffed. "Guess it'll go in my guess who don't sue section." I smirked. "Ryan and Jason." "Wait, your best man and groomsman?" His voice shot up in disbelief. "Yeah. Who was the victim?" I hesitated for effect. Then, my voice cold, I answered, "Guess." Nate chuckled. "Your mom." I didn't laugh. "My fiancée." I corrected, my tone bitter. "Or ex-fiancée." The line went silent. "You knew about this?" I pressed, anger rising in my voice. "No," Nate admitted, carefully. "But honestly, I'm not shocked." "Why?" "Because there's been talk about Madeline and her boss." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "It's been floating around for months. Word is she's been entertaining him to land clients." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. "You're saying she's been sleeping with him?" Nate exhaled. "Probably." I stared at the floor, my thoughts spinning. How could I have been so blind? "That's love, Ethan," Nate said, his voice laced with sympathy. I clenched my jaw. Should I ruin everything? Nate didn't hesitate. "That's why you called. It's time for payback." We hung up. Before I could process my next move, a policewoman approached. She was calm, confident, like she had done this 100 times. "I'm Constable Carter," she said, offering a small smile. "I work with sexual assault survivors. Can we talk?" I forced a polite expression, already skeptical of how much help she would be. She crouched slightly, her posture relaxed. Before I could respond, the door opened again. Madeline walked in, escorted by Sergeant Mitchell. I immediately stood, my face shifting into the perfect concerned fiancé. Madeline barely made it 2 steps before she broke down in tears. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close. "It's okay," I murmured. "You're safe now." Even as my lips formed the words, my mind was already working through my next move. Both officers handed me their business cards before I left. On the drive home, Madeline wouldn't stop clinging to me. She kept calling me wonderful, telling me how much she loved me, whispering how grateful she was that I had saved her. It was all an act, and I had to play along for now. Back at the apartment, I focused on cleaning up. Madeline, desperate for closeness, kept pushing me toward the bed. "Come on, baby, hold me," she whispered, tugging at me. I stepped away. "I just need to clean up first." "Go to bed. I'll be there soon," she urged, her tone insistent. I barely held back my disgust. "I'll be there soon," I repeated. Finally, she sighed and went to bed. Once I was sure she was asleep, I connected my hard drive and reviewed the footage. From the moment Ryan and Jason walked in, it was clear this wasn't an attack. Madeline had initiated everything. She was eager, practically begging. The betrayal burned in my chest, but I forced myself to stay focused. A false report charge was definitely an option, and if the prosecutor was feeling aggressive, I might even get real justice. But then something else caught my attention. Ryan and Jason weren't just here for Madeline. They were here for the drugs. Their conversation confirmed it. They got the pills from Lucas. I had suspected Lucas was dealing, but now I had proof. More than that, Ryan and Jason had openly discussed lending him money for his latest supply. That meant possession, intent to distribute, and conspiracy, 3 more charges. Even if they hired a high-priced lawyer, their reputations were done. I had planned to send the footage to the police around noon, but after Mitchell's cold reception earlier, I decided to do it now. At 3 a.m., it would look like I had nothing to hide. I dialed Sergeant Mitchell. Staff Sergeant Mitchell? His voice was groggy, annoyed. Hey, it's Ethan Caldwell. We met at the hospital when I picked up my fiancée. Didn't wake you, did I? No, I'm on night shift, he muttered. What's up? I've got CCTV footage from my apartment, I said, making sure to sound hesitant. His tone sharpened. Why didn't you mention this earlier? I exhaled, adding a shaky edge to my voice. I forgot with everything going on, but I just checked it. What did you see? Mitchell demanded. I hesitated, then let out a fake sob. I don't think it was coercion. Silence. Then, wait, what? They were on something, I said, voice cracking. They put something on the coffee table, but I need to review the footage again to be sure. Mitchell cursed under his breath. We've got lawyers breathing down our necks. Can you send it over? I think I can email it. Send it now, he ordered. I took down his email and ended the call. I sent the files to my computer, then tried to sleep. But my mind wouldn't stop racing. Madeline, Ryan, Jason, the betrayal, the lies. Around 5 a.m., my phone rang. Sorry to wake you, Mitchell said, sounding unexpectedly upbeat. I groaned. I was trying to sleep, but it's hard. Understandable, he said. Can we meet for coffee at 8? I need to go over a few things. Sure, I replied, adding some irritation to my voice. There's a cafe near Surrey Hills, close to the Oxford Tavern. Know it? Yeah. Great. Just avoid the usual spots, too many cops hanging around, Mitchell added. Got it. See you at 8. I hung up, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was useless. By 7 a.m., I dragged myself out of bed, showered, and got dressed. Madeline lay in bed, eyes closed, her breathing too controlled. She was awake. At 7:30, the morning news caught my attention. Police raided a house in Bronte early this morning, arresting 2 men connected to a local pill ring. I smirked. Nice work, Mitchell. I checked the gossip column next. Guess who didn't sue had a new entry. An esteemed PR expert and her fiancé were caught in a compromising situation with 2 members of the groom's party. The groom, a rising star in private banking, was not involved. I exhaled through my nose. This would shake things up. But then I thought of Madeline's parents. They didn't deserve to hear about this from strangers. I had to tell them myself. I dialed. Richard answered. Hey, Ethan. How was the bachelor party? It ended early after some drama in Brisbane. I need to meet with you and Margaret this morning. His tone shifted. What happened? I can't explain over the phone, Richard, I said evenly. A long pause. Is this about the newspaper? I took a breath. I'll explain in person. Can you come to the city? Another silence. Then, all right. Where do you want to meet? That bakery near your old office. The one with the great cakes. Sounds good. We'll see you there. Then, softer, Ethan, don't make any decisions too quickly until you have all the facts. I let the silence sit before answering. I already know enough, Richard. I'm sorry. My throat tightened as I hung up. I stepped outside into the crisp autumn morning. The sky was clear, the air fresh. A perfect day. And yet, I felt nothing but cold. I decided to walk to my meeting with Mitchell. It made me a little late, but I didn't care. When I arrived, Mitchell was just about to leave. I thought bankers were supposed to be punctual, he teased. I smirked. I'm still on vacation. He grinned, then his face hardened. We got the results last night, Mitchell said, settling into his chair. The CCTV footage gave us more than enough. We split the suspects up, asked about the pills, Mitchell said, sipping his warm milk. They immediately blamed each other. I ordered an orange juice, trying to keep my expression neutral. We got Lucas's name from them, Mitchell continued. Raided his place and found more pills. The substance squad is thrilled. Lucas stayed quiet at first, but once we showed him what we had, he started talking. He even gave up his supplier's name. I leaned forward. What's next? The first 2 have a bail hearing tomorrow, Mitchell replied. Lucas might be there, depending on how he plays it with the prosecutor. Public hearing? I asked, hoping for some transparency. Yeah, Mitchell chuckled. Lawyers want it private, but the prosecutor is pushing for public. He flipped through the Morning Herald, landing on the CBD section. I'm not sure I follow, I said, feigning ignorance. I'm talking about your CCTV system, he said with a smirk. Remote access. You have a time map, right? I could probably get a warrant and check it out. I kept my face calm. Why bother? By the time you get a warrant, the hard drive could be erased. Mitchell grinned. You just confirmed my suspicion. He stirred his milk lazily. I'm not interested in you, Ethan. But I am curious. What do you plan to do with Madeline? I frowned. What do you mean? We could charge her with filing a false report, Mitchell explained. But it's her first offense, so it might not go far unless you want revenge. You don't seem like the type. He flipped the paper over again. Call me after 6 if you want to press charges. Otherwise, it's over. He stood up and left, leaving me to sit there, stewing. I finished my juice, stepped outside, and made my way toward work. The weight of everything pressed down on me, but at least Ryan and Jason's downfall was in motion. As I walked into the bank lobby, I felt it immediately, the whispers, the stolen glances. I ignored them, stepping into the elevator. A few others joined me, and just as the doors were closing, the postman rushed in, nearly knocking over the secretary's cart. Hey, Ethan, how was your weekend? She asked, pretending to steady herself. The postman grumbled, rubbing his shin. The tension in the elevator was thick. No one met my eyes. When the doors opened, I stepped out, heading straight for the CEO's office. The secretary barely glanced up before motioning for me to wait. She knocked on Harrison's door, then returned with a polite smile. He'll see you now. I sat down, watching her carefully. I was abandoned at the altar, I blurted. She winced. At least you found out before it was too late. Her face quickly hardened, as if realizing she had said too much. I had her sympathy now. Getting through to Harrison would be easy. Inside, Harrison, a tall man with graying curls, gestured for me to sit. Ethan, I wasn't expecting you this morning, but given the situation, it's best we address this now, he said, clearly uncomfortable. I let the silence linger before speaking. I need time off until the end of the week, I finally said. But since my personal issues involve company employees and the PR firm, you should know what's going on. Harrison stiffened. Go ahead. I took a slow breath. Last night, I got a call about noise from my apartment. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but when my neighbor insisted, I called the police. They arrived and found pills in my apartment. Madeline was tied to the bed. Ryan and Jason were. I trailed off, pulling out a handkerchief and dabbing my eyes. No tears, just the act. Harrison paled. Go on. They thought it was coercion at first, I continued. But after questioning, that was ruled out. Ryan, Jason, and Lucas are all being held on drug charges. Harrison leaned forward, his face grave. This is a disaster for the company. It's bad for everyone involved, I agreed. What did Madeline say? I haven't spoken to her yet. Just the police. Harrison muttered under his breath. Terrible. Just terrible. He let out a slow breath. I think we can safely say Ryan and Jason won't be returning to the company. Take all the time you need, he added, relieved. Call me Monday, and we'll talk. I stood to leave, then hesitated. What about the PR firm? His reaction was instant, his face tensed, his fingers tightened around his pen. Yes, well, we'll conduct an internal investigation. Ryan and Jason handled the tender process. I'll speak with Patrick, their CEO. He was lying. His sweaty palms and strained expression told me everything I needed to know. Harrison was the other man involved with Madeline. I left his office, the weight of realization settling over me. I couldn't confront them all at once. This needed a different kind of revenge. I took a taxi to the bakery to meet Madeline's parents. Arriving early, I ordered coffee and, out of habit, checked the security feed on my phone. Madeline was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and texting. A minute later, she went back to the bedroom, put on a robe, and let someone in. I expected her parents. Instead, Brandon walked in. My chest tightened. Madeline moved toward him, attempting a kiss. Brandon stepped back. She tried again. He dodged her, moving behind the couch to create space. She was persistent. He kept backing away. Eventually, they sat, and she started crying. Brandon hesitated, then pulled her into a hug. At first, her arms wrapped around his neck. Then, I noticed, one of her hands had moved onto his lap. A wave of emotions crashed over me. She wasn't just broken. She was desperate. Just then, a soft tap-tap-tap sounded on the cafe window. I looked up. Madeline's parents had arrived. Richard waved as he made his way through the cafe. He was alone. I stood to greet him. Is Margaret coming? He sighed. No, she's staying home. After reading the paper, I thought it'd be better if I came alone. She's been dealing with high blood pressure, and I didn't want to stress her more. Probably a good call, I said. Richard was visibly rattled, his usual composure slipping. That nonsense in the paper, it's all lies, he said angrily. You should sue them for slander. I shook my head. Wouldn't help. Lawsuits are expensive, and they just keep printing more. I hesitated. Besides, unfortunately, it's true. Richard's face twisted. What does truth have to do with anything? He snapped, lowering his voice when the waitress walked by. What do you mean it's true? I leaned in. Last night, the police responded to a noise complaint. When they arrived, they found Madeline in my bed, with my best man and another groomsman. Richard's body stiffened, his jaw clenching. They thought it was coercion at first, but... Stop. Richard cut me off, his face flushed. This is ridiculous. My daughter would never do something like that. I exhaled. I'm sorry, Richard, but the photos don't lie. Richard shot up from his seat, his voice rising. The wedding is off. That's not helping, I said, thrown by his outburst. People fake photos all the time. Richard was a man who needed to see things for himself. I didn't want to hurt him, but I had no choice. I pulled out my phone, brought up the security footage, and turned the screen toward him. The video showed Madeline on the bed, one leg hanging off, Brandon on top of her. Richard stared at the screen, then scoffed. This doesn't prove anything. It could be staged. I kept my voice flat. This is a live feed from my apartment. His face contorted in disbelief. What kind of sick freak are you? His voice was trembling. I'm glad Margaret isn't here to see this. I'll tell Madeline, he threatened. She won't let you. Shut up, I said coldly. 3 meters, now. Richard's face turned red with rage. You idiot. Sit down, Richard. My voice was low but firm, loud enough that a few heads in the cafe turned. Richard hesitated, then slowly sank back into his seat, looking stunned. Give me your phone, I ordered. After a tense moment, he handed it over. I dialed Madeline's number and placed the phone face down. The screen froze as Madeline reached for her phone. Richard flipped his over and stared at the incoming call. His face deflated. He knew. It was over. I'm sorry, Richard, I said, quieter now. You should have known. He wiped his eyes, nodding silently. You and Margaret don't deserve this, but I can't go through with the wedding. Richard swallowed hard. Have you told her? No. She was asleep when I left this morning after my meeting with the detective. Richard exhaled shakily. God. She's with that guy again. I shook my head. Not the same guy. Ryan and Jason are dealing with their own problems. Richard's face paled. Oh no, he whispered. I stood. Let's take a walk, Richard. We both need some air. We walked in silence for half an hour. By the time we reached a taxi stand, Richard seemed calmer. When are you going to tell her? He finally asked. When she has a free minute, I answered bitterly. Richard turned away, his eyes welling up. A father can't stop loving his daughter, he murmured. I nodded. Yeah, Richard. Of course. I'll let you know before I do anything. We shook hands awkwardly before he stepped into the taxi. I walked on, my mind spinning with my next move. In a quiet corner of the park, I checked the security footage again. Madeline was back in her robe. Brandon was tying his shoes. Idiot. He was engaged to Sophie Ryanhill, heiress to one of Australia's wealthiest mining families. Brandon had just thrown his entire future away, and I was going to make sure Sophie found out. When I got home, Madeline wasn't there. That worked to my advantage. It gave me time to prepare a video for Sophie. Later, I learned that Brandon had been sent by Jason and Ryan's lawyers. They were worried Madeline might interfere with the case. When Brandon told her the coercion charge was dropped, she collapsed, devastated. He comforted her, but it was clear she now understood just how badly she had screwed up. I was making dinner when the door opened. The sound of high heels clicked against the floor. Madeline and her bridesmaid, Shelley, walked in. Madeline's eyes were red. Shelley was tense, bracing herself for what was coming. Madeline reached for me immediately. Ethan, darling, how are you? She asked, her voice trembling. We've been so worried. I didn't move. Keeping my distance, I replied, I've been busy, with the police, my boss, and your father. Madeline stiffened, caught off guard. Shelley stepped in. It wasn't what you think, she began. Your drink was spiked at the bachelor party. Ryan and Jason offered to take you home, but took advantage of you instead. Madeline reached for me again. I took a step back. Is that so? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Shelley pushed forward. Like Madeline said, it was just a little fun that got out of hand. I turned to her, ice cold. And did I imagine Madeline sleeping with Brandon this morning, too? Shelley froze. Madeline paled. You spiked my coffee, I continued, my tone razor-sharp, before she slept with Brandon? Shelley's face twisted with panic. You're on your own now, she hissed at Madeline before storming out. Madeline tried to stop her, but Shelley shoved her aside. I let out a slow breath. I knew you were a party girl, I said quietly, but I didn't think you were such a strumpet. The door slammed, leaving just the two of us. Madeline crumpled to the floor, sobbing, whispering frantic apologies. This wouldn't have happened if you had stayed with me this morning, she mumbled, her voice thick with desperation. I scoffed. Why is it always someone else's fault with you? My patience was gone. Just shut up, Madeline. Do you think I care about your excuses? Your lies. I was drunk. I was upset. It only happened twice, she pleaded. Twice? Really? I challenged. She sniffled, nodding weakly. Please, Ethan. I took a slow drink from my beer. You're pathetic, I muttered, my disgust clear. Madeline flinched. I leaned forward, my voice laced with mockery. Just twice? Funny, because I seemed to remember hearing something else. I lowered my tone, mimicking Ryan's voice. God, I miss you. Then I let her words finish it. I miss you too, Ryan, I added. Madeline's face twisted in shock. How did you know? She stammered. I took another drink, letting the silence stretch. Then I smirked. Your tongue was probably overworked last night. She paled. Remember when you moved in? I asked, my tone cold. She hesitated. Yeah, but you said you didn't use the security system. I don't, I said, setting down my beer. But they still work 24/7. Madeline's face crumbled. I thought the police might need proof of coercion, I continued. Turns out, all they got was proof that you're a lying strumpet. Her sobs quieted to a soft whimper. She slumped against the wall, looking small, helpless. I debated my next move. Mitchell wanted an answer about the perjury charge, and I still wasn't sure what I wanted. Instead of yelling, I grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet. Sit, I said, leading her to the kitchen table. She tried to lean against me, but I stepped away, grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, and sat down across from her. I cracked one open and slid the other toward her. I just want you to understand, I said coolly. We're done. Fine, she muttered weakly. I took a slow breath. The cop asked if I wanted to press perjury charges. He wants my answer by 6. That gives you 30 minutes to be honest with me. She gripped the beer, staring at the condensation. Please, Ethan, don't, she whispered, voice breaking. I cut her off. Answer my questions, or wait for the cops to show up. She swallowed, then tilted her head back and downed the beer in one go. I leaned forward. Someone told me you've been sleeping with your boss. Is it true? Her hands clenched into fists on the table. Then, slowly, she nodded. I let that sink in before asking, how long? Madeline wiped her eyes. 9 months, she sobbed. I exhaled sharply. You've only been there 10. She nodded again. I shook my head. Go on. She sniffed, then swallowed. I got transferred to the corporate team to help with the market push, she admitted. A month in, my boss, Patrick, calls me into his office. He was furious. We lost 3 major clients. He told me I wasn't pulling my weight. I said nothing, letting her keep talking. He stood by my desk and said, you were hired for your strengths. Time to show them. Then he started unbuttoning my blouse. My jaw clenched. That's sexual maltreatment, Madeline. Why didn't you report him? She let out a bitter laugh. Because that's how it works, Ethan. You're the golden boy, youngest to hit a 7-figure bonus. But me? I've had 3 jobs in 2 years. I needed to make an impact. Her anger flared, drying her tears. I leaned back. Sleeping with your boss to get ahead isn't the smartest move. Her expression hardened. I did it. And I landed 3 major accounts. They'll leave you high and dry. I don't think so, she said, her confidence returning. Patrick wanted to play it safe, so I secretly recorded some meetings. Kept backups. Just in case. I stilled. Where are the backups? She avoided my eyes. On my desktop. At work. Yeah. What's wrong? I sighed. Madeline, your boss will have a guard meet you at the door with your stuff. They won't let you near the computer. Her confidence wavered. I smirked. Your boss is Mr. Harrison's guy, right? She hesitated. You use your assets to land clients, right? I pressed. She froze. Is that all you want? She asked, incredulous. You're that desperate to see it? If you're so eager, I'll head to your office and grab a copy myself, I said. She scrambled for her keys but then paused, clearly rethinking it. I crossed my arms. No? Didn't think so. Madeline huffed, storming into the office. I followed, standing in the doorway as she struggled to access her computer. I can get in remotely, she said, trying to sound confident. But after a few failed attempts, she slumped. They blocked me. She sat in silence, processing. Then, suddenly, she perked up. There's a backdoor to Patrick's computer, she admitted. I stored the video files there. I smirked. All right, then. Copy everything. Especially his emails. She hesitated. Why his emails? Because I need leverage, I said simply. She didn't argue. 20 minutes later, she emerged with a hard drive in hand. Got everything, she said, forcing a smile. I took the hard drive. Did you grab the emails? Yeah, but I thought you'd prefer the juicy stuff, she smirked. I raised a hand to stop her. No more. I've seen enough. Madeline blinked, her face unreadable. She exhaled. I thought. We could start fresh, she said, her voice shaking. Sell everything. Move. Start over. Then she broke down again. I turned away. I'm done, Madeline. She flinched at my words. I left her there, walking into the office. Behind me, I heard the bedroom door slam. I sat at my desk and plugged in the hard drive. What I found was worse than I expected. Patrick and Harrison had been exchanging emails about Madeline sharing videos of her. But that wasn't the real bombshell. They were planning to defraud the bank. Patrick had been funneling inflated PR contracts through Madeline, with the extra cash going into Harrison's pension fund. And now, I had all of it. I called Sergeant Mitchell, and he picked up after the second ring. Thought you'd forgotten about me, he joked. It's 6:05 p.m., I said flatly. Mitchell shifted, his tone more serious. What's going on? Don't press charges. She's got enough to handle. There was a pause. Know anyone in anti-fraud? He asked. Maybe, I answered. Who's the target? Let's see, I said cryptically before hanging up. Next, I called Madeline's father and told him to pick her up. While I waited, I sent the video of Madeline and Brandon to his fiancée, Sophie. Hopefully, it would snap her out of her delusion before she made the worst mistake of her life. Richard showed up 40 minutes later. After some persuasion, Madeline finally left the bedroom, gathering her things with shaky hands. She barely met my eyes. The second they were gone, my phone rang. Nate from CBD Confidential. Did you see my column? He asked eagerly. Yeah, I replied, my tone unreadable. We didn't back down, did we? No, you didn't, I admitted. I got my revenge. Now I've got another story for you. Nate chuckled. Who's next? The two guys with Madeline? They'll face pill charges. 3 bankers with dope isn't a big deal, Nate dismissed. Not possession. Importation and distribution, I corrected. Now that got his attention. That's more like it, he laughed. After the call, I powered off my phone and unplugged the landline, trying to disconnect for a while. The next morning, at 9:30 a.m., an unexpected knock on my door. I opened it to find Mark, the building manager, looking uneasy. Ethan, what's going on with your phone? People downstairs want to see you, he said, stepping aside. Behind him stood a security officer and a man in a suit holding papers. Mr. Ethan Caldwell? The suited man asked. Yes, I replied, a sense of unease settling in. I'm from the bank's legal department. Your contract has been terminated under Section 112. You've embarrassed the bank. You're dismissed. I blinked. I signed a new contract 3 weeks ago. The man didn't even flinch. I don't know anything about that, he said coldly, handing me a severance check and a small box with my desk items. It took a second for the words to sink in. Wait, I called after them. You're firing me? What about my new contract? The man ignored me, already walking away. I looked inside the box. A few desk items. Some photos. No paperwork. This wasn't over. I immediately called my lawyer. After reviewing my contract, he sighed. You can challenge this. Has the payment gone through yet? No, it's due Thursday, I said. That's why they're acting now. They want you to fight for it. Can we sue? You could, but it'll take time. Is there any way I can talk to my boss? I've got something that might change his mind. Is it legal? He asked carefully. I haven't done anything illegal, I reassured him. Anything missing from the box? No, I said, then paused. Wait, I have golf clubs in the executive dining room's closet. How much are they worth? About $20,000. Gold-plated? He asked, surprised. Gold accents, I clarified. He hummed and thought. I'll get an order to allow access. I need it by 1 p.m. I pushed. We need to move fast. Showdown at the bank. By 1 p.m., I was standing outside the bank, waiting. My lawyer arrived late, holding the court order. Had to wait for the magistrates, he said, handing it to me. Inside, a guard blocked my way. Sorry, sir, you're not allowed in. I pulled out the legal document. This says otherwise. Step aside. He radioed someone. A few minutes later, the same legal rep from earlier stepped off the elevator. You're only allowed to go to the storage room and back, he warned. I didn't argue. He led me to the storage area, where I grabbed my golf clubs. As I adjusted my grip, I deliberately dropped one. Someone stole my hockey stick, I called out. The guard lunged, trying to grab me, but missed. I pushed forward, heading toward the executive dining room. He caught up before I could reach it, grabbing my arm. We struggled until a voice cut through the air. What's all this noise? Harrison. His gaze landed on me, and his face darkened. Why is he here? Sir, he has a bench warrant, the guard said, lifting me off the ground. I stopped resisting. Harrison was up close now. Mr. Harrison, I said smoothly. Always a pleasure. His scowl deepened. What do you want? I smirked. Thought you might want to rethink my severance. Not happening, he snapped. Take him out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. Tossing it toward him, I said, better take a look at this. Just, maybe not when your wife's around. Harrison caught it, his jaw tightening. What's this? I smiled. Call Patrick. He'll explain. Harrison didn't flinch. He pocketed the drive and turned away. The guard tightened his grip on me. You've got 24 hours, I called after him as the door slammed shut behind me. Outside, the guard released me. Parasite, he muttered. I dusted off my jacket. Sorry, my lawyer's waiting. A midnight message. The rest of the day was quiet. Until 11:30 p.m. A single text lit up my screen. Meet at Centennial Park Coffee Shop. 6:45 a.m. The next morning, I arrived at 6:30 a.m., hoping to beat Harrison there. We both had the same plan. I watched as he walked along one side of the park while I approached from the other. We crossed paths, but didn't stop. His voice was curt. What file do you want? Just what's mine from the new contract, I shot back. His expression tightened. And if I say no? I smirked. Then I sent another flash drive to the board of directors. Harrison exhaled sharply. You're playing with fire, Caldwell. I took a slow sip of my coffee. So are you. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. You'll get your damn contract. But if you push further. I raised an eyebrow. I don't make empty threats, Harrison. You know that by now. His jaw clenched. I turned away first, walking toward the street. Behind me, I heard him exhale, the weight of defeat settling over him. Game, set, match. The contract isn't valid until Thursday, Harrison muttered, his irritation barely contained. That's debatable, I replied coolly. But I'm not wasting time in court over it. He scowled. I didn't take you for a blackmailer. And I didn't take you for the kind of executive who screws his employees, I shot back. A long, tense silence hung between us before he finally exhaled through his nose, surrendering. Fine, he muttered. But I want all the files, notes, and backups you've got. You'll get them when I have a signed document confirming my rights, I said firmly. You'll have it today, he grumbled, turning to walk away. One more thing, I called after him. He stopped but didn't turn around. I want the same lawyer from yesterday to deliver the papers, I said with a smirk. I think that'll make this even more entertaining. Harrison turned back, his face burning with anger. You'll never work in this industry again. I smirked. Why limit yourself? Make it nationwide. Never again, you fool, he spat, shaking his head. It's been a pleasure doing business with you, I said, laughing as he stormed off. The real fun hadn't even started. I still had the emails between Harrison and Patrick. Once the money cleared, I'd send them straight to fraud investigators. For the next few days, I kept my head down, waiting for Thursday. When it finally arrived, the bank's lawyer showed up with the final paperwork. After reviewing the details, I signed everything and handed over an envelope containing a hard drive and flash drive. The lawyer left looking like he'd just swallowed something bitter. Later that evening, Richard and Eleanor came by to collect Madeline's remaining things. I heard she had gotten blackout drunk, confronted her boss at his home, and wound up with a DUI. Meanwhile, Ryan, Jason, and Lucas had been released on bail, but their troubles weren't over. The prosecutor was relentless, hinting at deeper corporate drug connections on national television. The three of them slunk out of court, trying to hide their faces, knowing their reputations were finished. Brandon, on the other hand, had vanished. Nate mentioned hearing whispers that Sophie's family had sent him somewhere in South America, to a remote mining town with an unfriendly local population. People who ended up there didn't tend to last long. At exactly 4:55 p.m., I checked my account balance. $720,000. At 4:59, I called Sergeant Mitchell. The next morning, I woke up to a knock at my door. Two fraud detectives and a securities agent stood on the other side. I handed over the emails without hesitation. After reviewing them, one of the detectives sighed. Looks like classic corporate fraud. The inevitable question followed. How did you obtain these emails? I didn't flinch. Not legally. The detectives exchanged frustrated looks. We know these guys are dirty, one of them said, running a hand through his hair. But they've got layers of legal protection. We can't just march in and arrest them. The securities agent, however, seemed less concerned. We'll treat them as leads, he said, slipping the drive into his pocket. Might take time, but we'll connect the dots. After they left, I sat back and exhaled. I had one, but Harrison wasn't about to go down quietly. Rumors about me were already spreading. Every bank I reached out to stopped responding. My name had been blacklisted. One evening, while walking near my apartment, a black luxury car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and Sophie smirked from the back seat. You look lost, she teased. I raised an eyebrow. You offering directions? I fueled up the company jet, she said. How about a break? I hesitated, then sighed. Should I feel sorry for myself or go on vacation? She shrugged. Your choice. I grinned. Give me 5 minutes to pack. She shook her head. Just get in. I slid into the seat. Where to? Mauritius. Private beaches, infinity pool, full staff, and a golf course. Sounds miserable, I joked. Let's go, she said, signaling the driver. 25 minutes later, we were in the air, flying to paradise. What was meant to be a 3-week getaway turned into 5 months. It was everything I needed. Did I sleep with Sophie? Of course. And a flight attendant. And a housemaid. And a few locals. Sophie was wild, unapologetic, unpredictable, and utterly insane when she wanted to be. But that's another story. I came back for one reason. Harrison's trial. When he walked into that courtroom calm, confident, and flanked by expensive lawyers, I knew this was just the start. At first, he seemed untouchable. The bank stood behind him. But by the end of the first day, his confidence had cracked. His tie was loose, sweat beading on his forehead as he whispered to his lawyer. The prosecution had a solid case, linking him to Patrick and the fraudulent PR deal. Then came the game changer. Patrick had surrendered the day before the trial, pleading guilty for a lighter sentence and agreeing to testify against Harrison. Sensing disaster, the bank abandoned him. On day 2, he entered the courtroom alone, now relying only on his personal lawyer. The bank's legal team officially distanced themselves, announcing plans to sue him to recover their losses. The defense fought back, introducing a hard drive filled with compromising footage of Harrison, Patrick, and Madeline. They claimed Patrick had blackmailed Harrison into the fraud. The media went wild. Journalists packed the courtroom, eager to dissect the scandal. Madeline testified, and Patrick returned to the stand, turning the trial into a full-blown spectacle. The prosecution countered by calling Ryan and Jason as witnesses. Even with their pending drug charges, their statements about Harrison's past dealings with Patrick were damning. The judge ruled there was enough evidence to proceed. Trapped, Harrison changed his plea to guilty and received a 2.5-year sentence. Did he end up ruined? Not entirely. Before the indictment, he had transferred most of his assets into his wife's name. She promptly filed for divorce, keeping everything. By the time the trial ended, he was living in his son's garage, broke, publicly disgraced. Still, men like him always find a way back. Patrick, on the other hand, was finished. He cut a deal but got hit with additional charges: unauthorized surveillance, illegal filming, and extortion. He received a 3-year sentence. Madeline, a suspended sentence for her involvement in the illegal recordings. But her reputation? Destroyed. Her name was everywhere. The scandal followed her, and by association, it followed me. Despite having little direct involvement, my name was forever tied to the mess. No bank would touch me. My financial career was over. So I started over. I launched an environmental project. I wasn't rich, but I was finally doing something meaningful. Sophie and I stayed in touch. She played the field. I let her. These days, I'm still figuring things out. I've started working on a wetland restoration project about 700 kilometers west of Sydney. A few mining companies and a bank are backing it, hoping to clean up their image. I'll be staying in an old homestead near the Darling River, once part of a massive sheep station. The air is clean, the space is endless, and maybe, just maybe, I'll finally find some peace.